to the Scaling Japan podcast, a podcast about how to grow your business from $100,000 and beyond in the land of the rising sun.
Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Batino, and on today's episode, we have Ruth Jarman again. She is the CEO of Jarman International KK, and her business has continually grown this last 11 years and supports partners in Japan and overseas with their marketing and business development needs. And Ruth also sits on the board of directors as an outside director for KADOKAWA and Fujibo Holdings. And this is our second episode on selling to the government. But for those first-time listeners, could you introduce yourself again, Ruth?
Yes, Tyson, thank you so much for having me again. And I'm really, really happy to have this opportunity to speak with everyone about this very extremely important and absolutely difficult topic. My company, Jarman International, we just celebrated our 11th birthday last month. And so I'm very happy about the fact that we've been able to grow and stay alive for 11 years. So I'm really happy about that. What we do is we try to connect amazing Japanese content with the international user. So the international user, basically people like us, is the growing market in Japan. And then the Japanese content, all of us know, is fantastic. But there's a lot of barriers to having that maybe non-Japanese speaking person access that wonderful content. So what my company does is we have a group of about 60 long-term residents of Japan who are international and who are able to kind of bridge, that gap that exists. And so we do consulting, we run Facebook pages, we run Instagram pages. We sort of do the promotion for these different companies and localities. And at the same time, it's not just, running a Facebook page. It's also consulting on what to put on the Facebook page in order to attract the certain people you want. So that's in a nutshell what Jarman International does.
Yeah, and our first episode had a lot of really good reviews. And I think it's really useful for someone who is a foreigner who does not know much about selling to the Japanese government.
Right.
And this is your first introduction in what to expect. And in today's case, I wanted to dive deeper on the topic of selling to the government. And I think the first area I wanted to focus on is kind of like the yearly timeline. So when does the government make budget decisions, RFPs, requests for proposals, the implementation, when's the decision made? And in my previous experience, I worked for an education company, which is the biggest one for sending teachers to Japanese cities, governments. And we typically had every November through January, I would have to wear a suit, go to a very high-pressured meeting where we would pitch our service to local governments. And it was every November to January, and hopefully we'll get an answer by January. In worst case scenarios, would find out in March. And so all the employees would find out in March. Really hellish experience for both the teachers and us when it's the March case. But that's just one example from my previous experience. I was kind of curious, do you know when the budgets are usually typically finalized?
Yeah, so I think that your experience is actually pretty much on the mark. I mean, that's what we do too. As we all know, Japan really likes to keep things in the gray area, not have either one or the other. Everybody likes to keep it in a very gray, sort of flexible sort of area. So oftentimes I notice, even if the budget is kind of decided, it doesn't really get specifically decided until the actual RFP is issued, until the very last minute, until that document is made public. You don't really know exactly what the budget is. What I was going to say earlier is if anyone listening to this podcast is actually waiting for the RFPs to come out, you're already too late. You're not going to get it. Sorry to be so honest, but you won't be getting it. So you should not be waiting for that RFP. You should be, like Tyson said, involved in a lot of meetings and kinds of decision making and different aisatsu, like visiting different places, from around November, because as soon as the new fiscal year begins in April, that's when activity starts with whatever was decided pre-fiscal year. But when the new fiscal year begins, they get everything going, everything gets started, but around November of that fiscal year is when they need to start figuring out what they're going to do for the next fiscal year. So November to January is about like, okay, this is what we decided for this fiscal year, and we are in the process of, we're doing it right now. And then now we need to figure out what are we going to do the next fiscal year. So when you go to those meetings, that's already for the next year planning. From November to January, you're basically helping them decide what they're going to do from the next year, April on.
Ah, gotcha. Because I had an experience where we did speak with them, and it was told to us that, the incoming mayor is very passionate about education, and they'll probably want to go more on education than previously. Because that new mayor's coming in, let's say they need to use those RSPs as a basis to plan that next
Exactly.
year.
So the new mayor would be starting the following April. So they're in the process of planning for the new mayor and the new policies that person's going to want to implement. And so they're getting ready for the following year. We just started the fiscal year for 2023, 2024, right? Because it's starting from April 1st until next March. And then the planning for fiscal year 2025, 2026 will begin at the end of this current year. That's how the government works. But then what all of us are interested in is how the subcontractors work, because anybody who's going to do this and anybody who wants to do it in a really cool way and in a very efficient and successful way would be a third tier subcontractor. So you have the end government body, and then you have the subcontractor, who's the big one, who I also mentioned in the last podcast, who has the qualifications to enter and to do the new satsu, to enter and answer the RFP. And then you have us. Sometimes you might have somebody else, and then you have us. What we're interested in is, when do the subcontractors get the money? The subcontractors, if you're involved with them from the beginning, you'll pretty much know as soon as the result of the RFPs. So I'm involved in one right now. The RFP came out about 2.5 weeks ago. And then usually the deadline is very tight. So that's why I say, if you're waiting for RFPs to come out, you won't be able to get it. The deadlines are so tight. So the RFP came out. The subcontractor already knew what was going to happen. They're used to this whole process. So as soon as the RFP comes out, we put together our proposal with the subcontractor. So we are the subcontractor, right? So with the subcontractor, we put together the proposal, our part of it. So it might be a very large proposal that we're doing, and Jarman International has one tiny part of it. And so we all put the proposal together with the subcontractor, and the subcontractor submits their proposal. And then the end client, which is the government, accepts that the proposal has come through. And then next week, all of us, at the time that we're set, we present our proposal to the government as well as to their outside objective, judges. And then after that, we find out whether we won or not. So that's the process when you are very close to the subcontractor, when you're helping them as a partner. But in other cases, which I'm also involved in, you might be involved in actually creating the proposal to answer the RFP. You also might be involved in the meeting to present to the government about, this is what our proposal is. And you are also, in the fray of, are we going to win or are we not going to win? So at the moment, I'm in one of those. In other ones, that I don't know well is subcontractor, and they have already won the RFP. Okay, so this is a whole new, different pattern. So I'm in a situation now at this time of the year, which is May, where we don't know if we won or not, and we're going to find out if we won or not at the end of May. But there's a whole bunch of other RFPs happening at this moment. And let's say they have to do with inbound or promotion to the United States audience or something like that. Somebody wins it. some subcontractor wins that proposal. And then usually around July is when they start contacting Jarman International to say, we want this project, this is money we have, this is what we're supposed to do, can you help us? And so what I notice is that all the activity really starts July, August, or like the planning where you say, okay, this is what we can do for you. This is the kind of Instagram we would propose for you. This is how we would do some press releases for you. So it's kind of like proposal. And then it's like to the subcontractor, right? Proposal to this, not to the end government anymore, because they've already won it. This is the pattern where the subcontractor has won it. So you give your, like, this is what we can do. This is how much it'll cost. And then they talk to the government about, oh, we found this company, Jarman International. This is what they can do. And we're thinking of asking them everything okay, because they're already starting their monthly meetings with the government, okay, because they've won. And so then they come back and say, okay, let's do it. And so the real activity, the busy season, is September, October, November, December, January. January is when you start having to do the reporting. February is when all the reporting is done. March is when it's decided whether this was successful or not. And then you start the process again. Did that make any sense?
Yes, if I had to summarize it, so I think for the RFP itself, you need to get ready for that in November, and you'll be involved in the proposals from November, December, January. Sometimes for like more other projects, it could be throughout the year, but you're kind of juggling both the execution of existing projects and proposing for new projects at around the same time.
Oh, that's a really good point. So the CEO should be focused on winning RFPs, pinpointing the subcontractors you want to work with. And then you have a project manager that you hire separately that is going to be running that project until the end of March and working with the subcontractor to make sure the reporting is correct. Because something that everybody really needs to understand is that the beauty and the difficulty is all in the details. Okay, let's say the RFP has come out, you've done your proposal, and you've won it. The most important thing, everybody listen, is not making sure that you follow through with everything that you proposed. Of course, that's important, and you absolutely have to do it. The most important thing, there's this document called the Shiosho, which is basically the contract. So after you win an RFP, the government goes into a contract with the subcontractor, not you. So I'm assuming everyone here is not going to try to be a subcontractor, because I really don't think that that's an efficient way for people like us to, help Japan. The government does a contract with the subcontractor. And that contract, whatever is written in that contract, if that is signed and the subcontractor does not do every single thing that is in that contract, basically it's called keiyaku, it becomes furiko. Furiko means inability to finish the contract. And dude, you're working with the government, It wouldn't be breach of contract, because breach of contract is where you psychologically or intentionally don't do something, which none of us would ever do, right? It's more like incompletion of contract agreement. So if it becomes incompletion of contract agreement, I've been in a situation like this before. The subcontractor has to return the money. So all the money that they've been paid to execute this project, they can get penalized. They have to return the money they received from the government. And sometimes I don't think it's ever like the whole amount, but it could be the whole amount that they have to return. And that hurts us, right? Because we've also received money. So in order to save our subcontractor, we would also have to return money. So after the fact, in March, after you've already done the project for, like a year almost, if in the contract, not your proposal, okay, so you have to separate those two. In your proposal, you might say, we're going to guarantee you 1 million views on the YouTube channel. And if you've done that in the proposal, but it's not in the contract, you're okay if you end up at, 999,000 views. But if it's in the contract that you must commit to 1 million views, dude, if it's February and you see that it's 950,000 views, you better get some extra budget out of your, savings, whatever you need to do to pass that million mark, because if you don't pass the million mark, everybody's in trouble. The subcontractor's in trouble, you are in trouble. And honestly, if anybody ever did Fudiko, which is like incompletion of contract, most of the time they can't even bid for anything after that. And definitely as like a Jarman International kind of company like mine, I don't think we would ever get any more work again. So that's where it gets a little bit exciting with the core 50 people who are like ad hoc consultants. I have to be, as the CEO, to mitigate the risk to my company. I have to be so careful that whoever I hire as kind of like a main member of this project, they need to know what is in that contract. Sometimes we hesitate because we don't want to show them exactly how much money we're getting. If you're kind of a tricky CEO, you don't want to be too transparent about like your numbers for your company, right? But I always feel like, if you got somebody who's sort of like the main person on one of your projects, you really need to tell them exactly what the expectations are, exactly how much you're getting paid for it, and just be transparent about that and make sure that they understand this is a serious commitment. And if we don't follow through on everything that's in that contract, we could get in a lot of trouble.
One of the common challenges I see with my consulting clients is not having any staff internally who can drive marketing strategy and execution to the next level. This really limits the growth trajectory of a company, especially for a leader like you that wants to go from 30 million to 500 million yen a year and does not have the time to spend years learning through trial and error. To solve this problem, I'm launching a marketing agency that can help companies like yours to increase leads and closing rates through SEO, Google Maps, content marketing, and websites that convert. Head over to scalingyourcompany.com and book a free consultation. Let's talk about what your business needs are, where your current strategy is letting you down, and how we can help you see real results with the methods I've successfully implemented at multiple companies myself. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, I see the benefit to that is by being transparent with them, they don't have unnecessary thoughts that serves as a friction to actually getting the job done and getting it job to the quality that is expected as defined in the contract as well.
Right. So just as a little hint, when I invite people to be on my projects, I don't know if I mentioned it in the last podcast, but I think the biggest expense for my company is people, because I don't rent a big office space. I don't do advertising for the company. So I try to invest and basically overpay people for parts that they play in these projects. On the other side of that, I don't hire any full-time employees. When somebody works for me on an ad hoc basis, they're getting paid very well. So I try to be really clear about, this is how much I'm going to pay you. This is the expectations are. And this is what the total budget of the project is. And this is the part that we have, just so that they feel like they're on board, like as a partner, not as somebody, who might be being cheated. You know what I mean?
And that's kind of what I was referring to. By being transparent, they don't have those unnecessary thoughts like I'm being cheated, which actually affects their execution. And it wastes the manager's time to have to deal with that.
Right. It's very difficult because sometimes when you're doing these big government projects, on the contract, they require, like for instance, in a past project that we had, in the contract, they require that we use Lonely Planet as a media for promotion. Lonely Planet is like mucho bucks, it's so expensive. So if that's a requirement on the contract, if you don't tell the project manager that, they've required it on the contract, it's not my choice, they've required it, then the project manager will be like, why are you using this super expensive place and not paying me more? You know what I mean? So it being really open about like what the requirements are and why the money is being spread out in this way. I think, I'm never scared about talking about money. I never hesitate in like being very clear about who's getting paid what and stuff. And I think that that's actually been a real strength for me. Honestly, like if I was just in this business to make money or something, I probably would have given up a long time ago. I'm really in this business to, help Japan, help the world, help the United States, help my country, help my other international members of Japan. So the goal for me is not really in the money. And I think that kind of like frees me up in a way to be really clear, like with exactly how much we're paying, why we're paying this much, why we're getting this much.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent long-term strategy.
Yeah.
And the risk of making a mistake is so great that you can't afford to make one big mistake.
No, you
So
can't.
yeah, yeah, and it's just nice having people you trust that you can take a half a day off and you know that nothing will break.
Maybe that's my paranoia problem, is that I love people and I really do trust everybody on my team. But, humans are human, right? So even if when I was at Space Design, people used to say that, Ruthie only has like yen signs in her eyes. You know what I mean? Like all she cares about is money. But I was more caring about the clients and also trying to keep the company afloat. That was what I was most concerned about, because it was, the balance sheet at Space Design was not very healthy. So I feel like even though there were so many great people that I worked with and that I really loved as people, when it comes to business, humans are human. And so I find that the transparency can actually really help with the trust. And also, the more transparent I am, I notice that the people that are trying to be tricky about stuff can't really hide in the shadows. It pulls them out. I've had situations where, nobody was stealing anything, but a couple people that worked for me were very like suspicious about how we did the business. So what I try to do is, like, every year when we have like a little gathering to say this is how we did over the year and this is what we're looking forward to, I give like very clear numbers. I print it out and I say this is what our revenue was. You can see our profit is like this big. And people who work for an American should already know that anybody who's American who owns a company overseas is not going to want any profit for their company because of the US tax laws. Any profit that Jarman International makes is seen as my personal income as an individual. So I have to pay taxes on that, even though it's never been in my bank account. You know what I mean? Maybe our topic about money is a little bit too long, but I really think that when you're working in Japan, everything's so convoluted anyway. It's good to be really clear about money and budget and who's getting what. And yeah, especially with the project manager.
Yeah, and I think when everything's transparent, it's much less management you have to do. I mean, you're not managing narratives with different people. Everything's just one format.
I learned that at Space Design because I couldn't remember. Like if I told this one, if I told this person I'm giving them a 5% discount, this person gets 8, this person gets 10. I can't remember which one I told what to. So why don't just make it like across the board corporate discount 10% and nothing other than that? And then we made a rule of we're trying to be fast, flexible, friendly, and fair. So keeping it at 10%, like up to 10% discount, that's all we do. And if it's above that, you have to get special permission or something. That makes everything fast. And it's also flexible because you allow all the salespeople to have this, width of 10% that they can give. Friendly, it's totally friendly because this guy is not going to meet that guy at the breakfast table and say, hey, what, you're getting 15%, I'm only getting 10%, this is unfair. That will never happen, right? If you just, everybody follows the same rule. And it's also fair, right? So yeah, I really try to keep by that.
Yes. Although we're talking about government sales, I think this is a good lesson on management.
Because, the government money is big. That's why. The government money you get is for the whole year. So you'll get money that's like, 7 million yen or 8 million yen or something like that. So the project manager is obviously, and everybody involved, if they know that this project, you're getting 8 million yen for it, they're all calculating, like how much am I going to get and what's going to go for wherever. And everybody wants to use it in a really efficient way. So you have to be really clear because a 1-year amount can look very big. But when you break it down with all the requirements, like if you're required to use Lonely Planet or you're required to use somewhere else, it goes pretty quick. So being, very open about the budget and how you're using it, I think is really important.
And I guess it makes sense with the project manager because, I mean, if they're a good project manager, they can make guesses. I mean, they might be way off, but if they just know how much is available, they can just focus on the project.
Yes. And they can also help you when the unexpected happens. Because on these government projects, the unexpected always happens. Basically, at the RFP stage, you're making all these commitments. But of course, you haven't signed any contracts with anyone. You know what I mean? Because you don't know if you're going to win yet. So you would not commit to doing 10 press releases unless you know you're going to win. So what happens is after you win, you go back to the place that you were negotiating with about the price and stuff. Suddenly their prices have gone up. So you and the project manager have to think about it. Okay, doshio, like that. And if the project manager knows the situation really well, they can solve problems together because unexpected things will always happen.
And I think one of the big takeaways I've gotten from this episode is that receiving work from the subcontractors. And
Yes,
I think
yes,
that's
yes.
and in my case, I worked for the subcontractor. So for me, it's
There you go.
normal to work with the government. But that company I used to work for, they also have 3,000 employees.
You just hit the nail on the head. That's so true. I think a lot of us internationals in Japan, without realizing it, we were working with the subcontractor in the subcontracting company. So we saw the 3,000 person company, the subcontractor company that we were working in, win these RFPs and bid for RFPs. And so you think I can do it too, right? But then
Yeah.
you go and you start your own company and you're like, wait a minute, I don't have the proper credentials to even enter the RFP. So what I would say to everybody listening is in your industry, whatever your industry is, find out who the main subcontractors are. Find out and then approach them and say, this is what I can do. And I think I could strengthen your proposal and I could help you win more RFPs. Who's going to say no to that?
I'd like to use the remaining time we have to kind of focus on. So, how can someone actually
Yeah.
receive your first contract from a subcontractor? So, I think last time you did mention the big one is the website. What are some, I guess, concerns a subcontractor would have about working with you or just a company in general?
Okay, so I'm thinking that most people listening to this podcast network a lot and they're on LinkedIn and stuff, right? So let's say you were interested in doing work, I know, for like Akira or something in Japan. So what you would do is you would try to find the players, the Akira players, the ones that are doing things. Like, I don't know, let's say you wanted to work. I'm not sure if Hoshino Resort is doing Akira anything to do with that, but let's pretend Hoshino Resort was doing something like renovating old buildings or something like that. And so, first of all, you're doing this research to find who are the players in this space that you want to join. And then you look at their websites first. You look at their websites and you would make like a list of number one, number two, number three, prioritize which ones you would like to work with. And the one that you would like to work with is the one that has an office near where you are. The one that you would like to work with is maybe has a CEO that you respect. Maybe you watched a couple like videos of that CEO on YouTube and you thought that they were somebody you could respect and look like they're trustworthy. Or maybe they've written some books and you've read some of their books and you think, that's a good one. So then what you do is you have to make sure when you're getting ready to approach that CEO or that company that your company looks attractive. Because basically you will be in a position to help that company make more money because they're a subcontractor who wants to get big orders from the government and you are a subcontractor who will help them get big orders from the government. So you need to look totally legit on the web when they do their due diligence. So let's say you met somebody at a networking event or you found them on LinkedIn or something. They immediately are going to think, this might be a good partner for us. Let me look at their website. Let me look at the CEO's LinkedIn profile. Now, when they come to your website, what are they going to look at? They're not going to look at your English page. They're going to look at your Japanese page because the Japanese page is what the government is going to look at. So when the government, when they submit you, like me, Jarman International, as part of RFP for, let's say, some government contract, the government people are not going to care how cool my website looks in English. They are going to look at my Kaisha Gayo, how much capital do I have, which I don't have much. I only have kuman. And everyone told me, and I believe, and I've been able to survive on that. So you do not have to have 10 million yen as your basic capital. But you need to have your kaisha gayo, your corporate outline in the normal format that most Japanese companies have. You need to have that little kojin joho privacy policy part attached to it. I mean, you have to have a totally legit Japanese website. and it has to be written in excellent Japanese. It can't be something that was translated from English that sounds a little weird to a Japanese ear. You just have to assume that people that don't speak English, don't know about Gaikokujin stuff, are going to read Japanese website as if you are a legitimate, full-on Japanese company. Present yourself, present your company as totally on the up and up. You've got a location in Tokyo. This is your address in Tokyo. There's a little map that shows how to get to your address in Tokyo. I mean, if anybody wants to look at my Jarman International Japanese site, it's always a work in progress, but we try our best that when people come to our site, they'll say, oh, okay, this is a legitimate company. Look at this, the Core 50 Consultant Group, and, description of the CEO and the team list. So remember, everyone, the subcontractor, the end user, everybody's going to do due diligence. And what they're going to look at is your Japanese site.
GK versus KK, does that make a difference?
Yes, KK. Has to be KK. So let's say you had other things that were really good about your company and you were a Godo Gaisha and it's totally fine. Like, I'm not saying you're not going to get something if you're GK. If you're going to open up something from now, definitely do KK, Kabushiki Gaisha. And definitely have your Kaisha Gayo and have your Daihyo Torishimariyaku very clear who is. And if possible, get a shared office in Minato-ku, Chiyoda-ku, or Chuo-ku. Even if you are based in Sendai or Osaka or Fukuoka or anywhere, having an address in Tokyo and in Minato-ku, Chuo-ku, or Chiyoda-ku will make a huge difference when places are doing due diligence on you. The reason being is because they will say, this person knows what they're doing. They won't think that you don't know what you're doing if you have it in Shibuya-ku or something like that. But if you've chosen Chuo-ku, Chiyoda-ku, or Minato-ku, they'll be like, okay, they know what they're doing. I'll just be totally open here. I love driving, and I ended up buying a new car. The first time in my life I bought a new car, and I chose to buy a Lexus because I knew that when I drive up in a Lexus to whatever company I'm going to or the golf course that I help or whatever, any Japanese person looking at a Gaikokujin who's driving a Lexus will be like, she knows what she's doing. And that it's really important because we look different, because we're not Japanese, to have the identity or the branding of, they might be Gaikokujin, but they know what they're doing. So anything that you can do to help with that impression that you give is really important.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Scaling Japan. In addition to serving as your fine host, I also provide advisory and coaching services to business owners who want to 2x, 5x, and even 10x their business. So stop holding your company and your team and your employees back, and let me help you and your company scale. Find more information at scalingyourcompany.com. Now back to the episode. And people are busy, especially people who have control over money. The less reasons you give them to say no, the better it will work out for you.
So you need to tick off those boxes, The more boxes you can tick off, the better.
And so I want to ask, so regarding having a contract with a subcontractor, is there anything we should be aware of?
When it's the first time, you don't really have much power, right? I mean, you're basically at the behest of the subcontractor. They don't know your worth very well yet. You don't really know how they work yet. So I always am really flexible with the first contract, and I'm really open to different budget types. And I just try to do what we can within that budget without going into the red too much. If I do go into the red a little bit, because I always try to overperform, I feel like it's, investment. So in that first contract, I really try to be flexible to what they need. And then after the first contract, when you really start to get to know each other, you can be a little bit more particular about, well, this is what we really like, or this, we'd rather do it this way, or something in the first contract is, everybody, all of us have our cash flow that we have to think about. So the payment schedule, I think everybody, you can do kodawari on that. You can be picky about that because most Japanese companies, any company you work with, understand that you have your own payment cycles. So my company's fiscal year ends at the end of October. So we often will say, if we're getting new work around September, we'll say, even if this goes until next March, which they usually do because it's on the fiscal year system, right? Even if this goes until next March, we would like to be paid half in September or October. And that helps our cash flow and that helps our balance sheet. And I will tell them, because our fiscal year ends at the end of October, it would be very helpful to us if you could pay half of it before the end of October and then the rest, in March or whenever you want to pay. And I've never had someone say no. Everybody says yes. You can be a little bit strong about that point.
Everyone has been very accommodating when it comes to understanding a fiscal year.
I feel like a lot of the people running companies in Japan, like internationals, don't know where they can do kodawari and where they can't. So the kodawari is like being picky, right? And I've learned over these 11 years where you can be picky, and you can definitely be picky with payment cycles. So if you need it ahead of time, the other side will be like, okay, we can't do the whole amount, but how about like 70% in advance and 30% later? That kind of like, everybody understands that the cash flow of a small company can be pretty picky. So that's okay to be picky about. You can be picky about how the subcontractor interacts with your members of your group. So in my case, I have a lot of team members that are working moms. So I can be picky if they're starting to send emails at like 1 a.m. So I will actually call that out and say, we have a lot of working moms. I'm okay if my working mom is sending them a mail at 1 a.m., but I want the client to be contacting them at 1 a.m. because most Japanese ladies who are working will feel pressure to answer right away, right? So I always try to tell my team, you don't answer the next thing, even if it comes like really late at night. So, being picky about the timing and the expectations for how quick answers come through is something, yes, I'm picky about that. Because, it's hataraki kata kaikaku. It's the changing the work style in Japan. So we're on the front line of that. And I feel like we also have to get society used to the idea of, it's a different way of working now.
Are there any other tips like that? Areas you do have wiggle room?
The various points about being picky with money is really important, because I think that a lot of internationals running companies are too flexible with certain points and then not flexible with other points. You really have to know which are the points that you can be flexible with and which are the points you cannot be flexible with. For instance, when someone comes to you in August after they've already won the RFP and they ask you to do something for this amount of money, they have no more wiggle room with that budget. It's no use trying to negotiate up on there. That's their budget. From the first moment they tell you it's Sanjuma yen, it is 300,000 yen. It's not going to go up no matter how much you negotiate. So in that case, you have to figure out what can you do within the 300,000 yen. And then you ask them, is it including tax or excluding tax? Sometimes if it's including tax, you can negotiate and say, can we do it tax separate? And a lot of times they'll say, oh yeah, okay, we can do it tax separate. And that raises your amount a little bit. But the 300,000 yen they're telling you is never going to go to 400,000 yen. If they're asking you about budget in November, that's when you can really give your real price. And you can say, with this one, we would like to have, 800,000 yen for this. And then they can come back and say, it looks like the RFP is going to be maximum 1 million yen. So I don't know if we can, and then that's when you can negotiate and figure out the price that you want. But around, November, after November, if people are asking you and giving you new work with certain amounts, don't negotiate with that. Just say, thank you so much. And that's how you get your first step into that subcontractor job. Remember, Tyson, you just asked me, right? How do you get that first contract? The way you get that first contract is you say yes to the first query. And you figure out, what can I do within this budget? Don't do your full service. Okay, now I'm getting into preaching mode. Sorry. A lot of my friends around me will do their best work for something that would be half of what they normally would be paid. Don't do that. If it's only 300,000 yen and you would normally get 600,000 yen, let them know. Say, this would usually cost 600,000 yen. I can't go in the red this much. So if we had 600,000 yen, this is what I would do for you. But since you only have 300,000 yen, instead of sending 10 people, I'll only be able to send 2, but I'm going to choose really good people to send. And so you're very transparent about your pricing. so that they understand your worth and they say, gomen nasai. Okay, so we have to have just 2 people come this time. Thank you so much. And we'll keep in mind that in your real universe that you would need 800,000 yen, and to do a really good job, you would need to send 10 people. It takes a lot of guts, everybody. It takes a lot of guts. It takes so much guts to, know where your line is, where you can be flexible, where you can, and you got to just imagine, what is the government official's, position? What is the subcontractor's position? By me negotiating this point, is that putting them in a difficult place? If it's putting them in a difficult place, you might not get work again. So you try to imagine what is the sweet spot for this subcontractor? What is the sweet spot for the government? Where can you wiggle? Where can you not? It's all in the communication, and you have to be very brave about what you really need as opposed to what you want. So yeah, I think that's somewhere I try to be really careful.
And I think one point that you've spoke over and over again, or how I interpret it, is really understanding the rules of the game. So there are rules to this game. It might not be codified. There might not be a manual for it or a rule book, but you don't want to be that person out there who's in a football soccer match and you're using your hands and everyone's like, oh, we'll never invite this guy again. And you're saying why are people kicking with their feet? That's stupid.
Yeah.
So it's really just so I think you explaining a lot of the rules and kind of I would say the areas where you can negotiate with.
Yeah.
I think that would be really helpful for the listeners. So I had other kind of questions, but I think this question of knowing where you can negotiate, were there any other areas maybe a foreigner should know about?
I think that a lot of people make a mistake in not communicating enough with the subcontractor or the person who's asking them for work. Just taking whatever's being said to them as sort of set in stone, that it's not going to change. As I said earlier, Japan loves to work in the gray area, Japan just loves to be in a situation where it's not really yes, it's not really no, it's kind of maybe, I don't know. So what I notice is that the process of figuring out what the job is going to be and who's going to do it is actually much more flexible than people think. So when somebody asks you, would you be able to do this? Don't just say, no way, we're not going to do that. That's too little bit of money or something like that. Don't do that. Just say, wait, what? Oh, that's interesting. First comment should be, wow, 面白いですね. That's interesting. Can you tell me more? Shall we have a little meeting about it? I'd really like to learn more about what you're saying. Or sometimes I say, okay, so what are the criteria for this work? It sounds really interesting. What are the criteria? Who's going to give a good response? Who would be willing to try? And I'm always willing to try. So when they contact me and they say, is this something that your company might do? I'm like, I don't know. Well, we've never done it before, but I definitely like to think about it. I have some people I know that might be able to help. And yeah, please tell me more. Please tell me more is always the best start. When they start telling you more, from the conversation, you'll get an idea of, okay, what is set in stone and what is not set. For instance, I had a sudden request out of the blue, at February. The subcontractor promised something to the government and they have not been able to fulfill it, and they're in panic mode and they have to do something. So there's a very good chance you're going to get it if you get a inquiry in February. So it was in February, one person to go on a trip and do some monitoring and consulting. Okay. And they needed it done that weekend. Okay. It was 3 days later. And a normal human being would be like, no, this is too short notice. No way. If you imagine, their problem is that they have to get somebody, right? Their problem is not money. Their problem is they have got to get somebody involved in media to go on this trip. It is no longer budget. Because remember I told you, if you don't fulfill the contract that you promised to, you get in big trouble. So you realize, okay, their problem right now is not money. So that's good for me, because if I pay somebody really well, there's got to be somebody who wants to go. It's just a matter of taking the time to find the person. And they said they needed somebody who's involved in media, who can publish something afterwards. So what do you mean by publish? Does it have to be on Japan Today? Does it have to be on Condé Nast Traveler? No. It has to be published somewhere that has a big following so that they can say they fulfilled their contract to the government. So what I ended up doing is I found somebody who's a good writer, relatively good writer, not a published writer, good writer, who was available to go, paid him really well, and then he wrote a fantastic article. I divided it up into many different pieces, and I published it on my LinkedIn page, which has almost 10,000 people following. He published it on his own stuff. We published it on the JI Facebook page, which has 5,000 something people. We did a news and results on our website. So it's kind of like a press release sort of publishing on our website. And so from their point of view, they got somebody, the person themselves got paid quite well. They got to write something really interesting. I got to publish something cool on my different social media for Jarman. And so from the government point of view, they were able to reach a whole bunch of people. I think we ended up, the reach that we got was over 10,000 people. So that was a good example of the initial request was something that was like, no, we're not going to be able to do that in your head. But then you're like, wait a minute. Okay, let me learn more. Like, what is your pressure point that you're working on right now? It's the person. It's not the money. So we were able to pay the guy really well to go. And Jarman was able to get a little bit of a buffer. So that helps our balance sheet. It works out. So to really listen and try to figure out what the points are is very important.
Yeah, and the subcontractor, they'll definitely remember that heroics that you pulled off that weekend.
Exactly. We made it happen. And I think anybody could. Anybody can. But most of us who are in our normal routine and think of our company in a certain way would be like, oh, no, it's too last minute. But isn't that a great opportunity for somebody like my company who's like, sure, we'll try our best. I mean, give me until tomorrow to see if I can find somebody. And this is the cost. Is that okay? They're like, yes, that's totally fine, because they don't care about money anymore.
Excellent points. We didn't have enough chance to talk about really like communication, but before we finish this episode, is there anything you'd like the guests or the listeners to check out, or any messages for the guests?
Well, I think that a lot of people are involved in maybe social media and promotion and marketing. And I think that our Visit Kochi Japan Instagram and Facebook is a good example of how we're trying to reach a new audience. So you can look at that, because I think that that is one of our successes. And I think that every single prefecture in Japan needs this kind of support. You know, we have kind of Kochi covered. We have Yonezawa and Yamagata covered. I would like to do Kawagoe. I would like to do Kurashiki and Okayama. Oh, we're doing Sado too. So Sado is already covered by Jarman. So, but all the other places, they need a lot of help. So look for the DMOs, look for, you know, opportunities, subcontractors that are getting work, and see if you can help them, because there's so much opportunity right now. The pie is just growing and growing and growing.
We do have some listeners who work for the Department of Commerce for their respective cities.
Respective cities in Japan?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
But they're more of the big cities, super big cities.
Yeah.
So if you guys have some projects as well, in prefectural people as well, prefectural commerce department.
And I also think a lot of the Akiya, people that are interested in Akiya and like renovating old Japanese homes, that is getting much more popular right now. So if you found a little town in Japan that's having a lot of Akiya renovations, that would be a good place to approach about, well, why don't we promote you now? You know, shall we help you? I think that would be a good opportunity for a lot of people that are looking for, you know, new avenues of work.
Thank you so much for sharing the hard-earned knowledge that you gained through years of blood, sweat, and tears.
Exactly. And I mean, if it's all coming from, you know, basically the bottom line is love, right? Like, you love this country, you love your own country, you love the people here. And if it's coming from love, like Tyson, you know, from Hawaii, like the aloha feeling. But yeah, it's not all unicorns and rainbows.
I gotcha,
so you will come across really difficult people that, and I've had power harassment, you know, over the 11 years, 2 or 3 times. And it's like, how do you get out of like those danger zones? Don't get your expectations too high that everything is perfect, But if you're coming from a place of love and honesty, humility, I would say 90% of the time, everything is going to be fine and your business is going to grow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.